And for our second installment in this series, conversations on leadership at the leading edge. And it's lovely to see you again, Anita. How are you
Hi.
today?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Yeah, amazing. Amazing. Thanks. It's good to be back again. And I thought today we could continue and build on, what we started last time, talk a little bit more about the mind, um, and how it creates our reality and how we can use that knowledge to great effect in our businesses, our relationships, and our life. And so looking forward to this one. Should be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I think we should just get straight into it. And, last time we didn't really talk too much about how, in fact, our mind creates our reality. So I'd love to maybe hand it over to you and maybe take us through, how does our mind create reality? And
So, how does our mind create reality? So, we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as it is through the lenses of our childhoods, pretty much. So, what happens is in the first few years of our lives, we are taking in the world and we are taking in experiences and we are listening to things that are being said to us. We are hearing our parents, we're hearing our school teachers, our family members, and we start to take in their worlds. Yeah. And we start to program ourselves through their language. And it's like we're testing a lot of the time as children. So we're not necessarily matching everything that we're hearing, we're taking it in and making a choice in essence. Even though we think that children don't have choice, we actually are very open from a very young age. And so what we're doing is we're taking in what people are saying and we are either choosing to match it, to do the same as them, or to mismatch it. And it's a bit like we're making choices. Do I want to be like this person? Do I want to be that way? Is it going to get me love to be that way, or do I actually want to do the opposite because I'm looking at them going, this is not the way that will get me the love that I need in this world. And so we become programmed in this way. And so as we go through life, we are less, taking in the world by just watching situations play out. And what's happening is we are taking in the world as much as, a tiny percentage of what's actually happening. And most of the time, we are making judgments and assessments of what's going on based on the language that we've learned growing up. So it's not just the language in terms of, we're speaking English, it's the language of the behaviors and the patterns that we're seeing in other people that becomes our language. And we believe that it's right and it's true. And even yesterday, I was having a conversation with someone about, I can't remember the specific, I think it was a driving thing. They were getting annoyed or something. And I sort of challenged them on their perspective on what was happening with the other person. And I said, but maybe they didn't feel that way. And they're like, well, what do you mean? That's the way that I felt about it. And I said, well, maybe they don't feel or think the same as you. And they kind of looked and went, well, they shouldn't they? Well, maybe they just should. And I was like, that's how a lot of people are living. It's like we just never get taught that we have different perspectives. So we go through the world believing that everyone maybe is like us or should be like us. So that's it in brief. Don't know what you want to add to
yeah,
that.
the world would be an interesting place, if everyone thought the same way. And it'd probably be pretty boring, I think. That's
And I
part of
guess
the,
that's it. We can often go with it would be boring, but would it be
yeah,
more peaceful? And
well,
for a lot
maybe.
of people,
Yeah,
it's not peace that we actually want, even though we think we want it, because a peaceful life could be a boring life, right?
right.
So
Right, true. Yeah, I've had a thing with boredom for 40 years of my life. But we won't go there just yet. I love what you've started with, and I might just take it in, a slight deviation, and just talk about, making meaning. We've run this in our sessions before, and, I love going to this basic exercise of just putting an image of a pen in front of a group of people and asking them to describe what they see. And we get them to pop it in the chat. And it's fascinating because everyone's contribution is partly the same, but mostly different. And, what we notice in a basic exercise like that is that people describe what they see differently. they're all focusing on their attention on whatever resonates with them that they learned in their childhood. Whether it's the functionality of something, whether it's the aesthetics of something, whatever it is, that's what comes to the fore in the responses.
Yeah.
And so you ask yourself the question, are we seeing the same thing or are we not? Well, in one sense we are, but we're not interpreting it the same way. We're making meaning in a different capacity. And, if you expand that up a little bit more, that's why we have conflict. That's why we have wars, etc. As part of the rich tapestry of life, I think, this fundamental humans are meaning-making machines.
Yeah. It was
and it's beautiful.
I was on a call yesterday with 4 people. So as the facilitator, I was more in that observatory position for a lot of the call, and there was these two people that I hadn't met before, and it was just really interesting. Obviously the same stuff was being facilitated, but the perspectives that were coming from the 2 other participants were so polar. You could hear the extreme. Well, I could hear the extreme enthusiasm and the personality type. Obviously, the whatever happened in childhood for this child to then have grown up into a very enthusiastic adult was, everything that was being heard was exciting. They were excited and they were loving it. And then on the other hand, there was this, very skeptical individual. So on one hand, one party was loving it, and on the other hand, the other party was questioning, and you could see the skepticism running very highly. So again, it's the same situation that we're viewing, but obviously whatever's happened to both of them, growing up, is playing into the questions they were asking, their enthusiasm, their skepticism that was happening in the moment. So it's always very interesting in these situations for me as I sit back and watch, and that's why I observe a lot. It's kind of like, because it's no longer being part of that and being able to simply observe what's happening for the group.
100%. That's fascinating. And, that's probably the best position to be in. And we might talk about that a little later on. A couple of other things that I'd love to, lift up as we talk about this stuff. One of the things that staggers me with the exercise with the image and the pen is that everybody describes a pen, but very few people actually describe it as an image of a pen. And it might seem a little subtle and it might seem a little naughty, but it just sort of goes to show that we don't really see reality as it is. And, a way of sort of encapsulating what you've been saying is we see reality as we are. And then when we're talking about these differences in perspectives, it's really beautiful to bring these differences of perspectives to the table. But if you look at what most people talk about in the business world, they're always talking about, the importance of culture. And usually what they're focusing on is trying to get alignment with everyone, everyone pointing in the same direction, everyone having the same purpose, everyone having the same intention. And it's really interesting. I'd love to hear a little bit about what you think about that, because, I've always felt that, what you're trying to do is you're trying to force individuals to conform. And sure, there's benefits in that. And you also lose something in the process of cultural conformity. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I was also having this discussion with another person a couple of days ago.
You've been having a lot of discussions lately.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit like we were actually talking about policing and that side of things. And it's like, as nice as it would be for us not to be policed and need to be governed or conform, it is in essence part of a stage that we're at as humanity at the moment where we need that, because we're not at a stage yet in our psychological development to not need policing as a whole. No. So I think there is that part where we look at it and kind of see that the way that we're going to start to break free of the need for conformity is when it's not needed anymore. But whilst it's needed, it is being used. So I think there's obviously measures that are being taken now to be more inclusive, and a lot of, corporates that we might go into to kind of open it up to hear different perspectives, to hear what's happening for people. But the thing is, as well, is whilst we're being driven by these programs, like I talked about, the enthusiast, the skeptic, whilst we're still being driven by this childhood stuff and not realizing that it's our childhood programs, then it's like conformity is needed on some level to control the programs, because we're not taught to control them or to deal with them. on our own individually at school, let's say. So it's like, because we haven't done that work in the earlier ages, we're now needing to be policed, and this conformity is needed. So that's the way that I see it. And so the more work that we do together on this stuff, individually and together, the less conformity, I guess, will be needed. That's my opinion.
Right. Yeah. That's a really cool perspective. So it just occurred to me as we're talking, we've talked a bit about the mind. We had 45 minutes last week and we've started off, we're a few minutes in this week. We haven't really described these programs. So I wonder if we could just take one of them. Maybe you've mentioned Skeptic and Trust a few times already, or maybe you want to pick another one. You mentioned matching and mismatching. Do you want to pick a program and just take people through what we mean when we're talking about these programs? Is that cool?
Yeah. So I think we did touch on it a little bit last time, and I think one that comes up quite strongly can be that we talked about it, I think last time, was the people pleaser. So a people pleaser would be what we call someone more on the matching side. So they say yes a lot. Yeah, they struggle to say no. At the other end of that spectrum is someone who is more on the disagreeable side. So you go people pleasing, disagreeable, or mismatching, matching. Yeah. So in childhood, again, something's potentially happened to us where we have wanted to be loved, to be liked, and so we go more for the people pleaser, for the yes, saying yes. On the other side of that is someone that becomes more disagreeable because for some reason they've needed to defend themselves in childhood. They may have watched their parents be very disagreeable, and that's all that they knew to be. So that's the end, let's say, of the spectrum that they chose. So through this work, what we're working with clients, with ourselves on, is to become more balanced in that, so that we say yes when we actually authentically mean yes, or we say no when it's actually really true, rather than being driven by the no because that's what we've always done and that's what we've learned, or being driven by the yes. So there's around 120 of these programs. That's just 2 of those programs. And that's really key to, the fundamental programming that happens to us in the key, those key formative around 7 years of our life.
Yeah, fab. Another one that I see all the time that'll probably resonate with the entrepreneurs in our audience and business owners is just a basic one of options and procedures. And, this is pretty easy to identify in yourself if you're listening. If you're an options person, generally you've got lots of ideas and lots of creativity, lots of free thinking. Generally, if you're looking at your computer screen, you might have 20 tabs open at once. Whereas if you're more on the procedures side, you might have 1 or 2 tabs open at once. And you're very diligent about executing whatever the task is that you're focused on. And, this is a really prevalent one in the business owner and entrepreneurial community because they tend to be very options driven, very ideas heavy and not necessarily getting the results by executing the procedures and paying attention to getting the job done. So these things are very practical. They seem a little abstract, but they're really practical. And we can see this straight away when we're working with our clients, what they favor.
And I think the really obvious one is these things like, and are you more on the introverted side or the extroverted side? There's some ones that are more kind of obvious to us, and that's the key within this work. There's 120 of these. They're not just they can go quite into even one being, are you more of a detailed person or more of a global person, big picture versus detail, for example. And so this is the fascinating stuff about this work, finding this out and working through this to become more balanced. And it can be really helpful to see, because often we can say, this is just the way I am, this is the way I've always been, and I can't change. And that's something that we have probably grown up, a lot of us, hearing. And so that was the beauty in coming into this type of work, to go, actually, we can change. A lot of the time when we can see where this has come from, it can be really helpful, because if you did grow up in a family, say, where you were surrounded by people that were, let's say, disagreeable family members, and you all just had this relationship of disagreeing with each other, and it being quite a loud environment, then what else do you know? You only know that. So you're still running that program as you're, into your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s without realizing that it's possible to have maybe a bit of an easier life with people if you practice saying yes a bit more. So the childhood, aspect of it can be really helpful to pinpoint where did this start. And actually, if I can see it's a program that's been running for so long, it's possible that it can be changed.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. So I just want to pick up on a word that you use there with the programs, just to really demonstrate, what we're after here with this kind of work. And you mentioned the word balance, and that's really what we're after in working with people, having balance. And so balance provides that flexibility, adaptability, resilience. It provides an expanded choice. If you're a balance, I use the seesaw analogy. If you're on the extreme of one side of a seesaw, you can't move anywhere. If you're on the extreme of the other side, you can't move anywhere. But if you're straddling the middle, you can respond, with grace and move to either side as you need. And that's the analogy that I like to use. And so, one of the things I just perhaps want to talk about for a couple of minutes is, what does balance actually give us outside flexibility, adaptability, resilience? One of the things we look for in terms of helping people is to develop their psychological maturity. And you mentioned just briefly the stage structure. So ultimately, with psychological maturity, it comes from balance. And the more of these 120 programs we've got in balance, the more psychologically mature we'll be. And that's what we look for in terms of being able to make far better choices in your business and your life. And essentially, if you're out of balance in any of these programs, there'll be things that you're unaware of. And so you won't be taking that in your decision-making process. And of course, logically, in every moment we're making decisions. Yes, no, or no choice. And so, what we focus on is developing a person's psychological maturity so that it doesn't matter what context we're talking about, whether it's business or intimate relationships or their health and well-being, whatever it is, they're making that choice from a far more mature position. So I wonder if you'd like to, elaborate on that, maybe just give a little overview of the stages if you think it's helpful for the audience.
You can do that. That's your you like to do, Andrew, you go for it.
Maybe we'll do the stages in the third session, hey? But yeah, the big idea here is that, with this work, it's very much we can quickly identify, out of these 120 programs, what are the blind spots of the person in front of us? And how can we help show a mirror really quickly so that they can practice leaning into what they're weaker at? And what we find is that that's a really quick way to get results. People see things straight out of the gate that they had no awareness of before, and that immediately expands their choice. So I think that's the main thing at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's crucial to say that there'll always be a practice for our clients to take away. So a simple example of a practice would be if someone is, highly on the agreeable side, they are, a high people pleaser, they will be given some homework to go away and to start to practice to say no and to feel really uncomfortable within that, within that place of saying no. It might be that someone is highly on the extroverted side and they really struggle to spend time on their own. So a homework for them will be, it's not to lock yourself away in your room for a week, but it will be to start small with this stuff. If you're finding yourself going out 7 days a week, 7 nights a week, let's say, because you can't stand your own company or your own mind, let's say, then a practice might be to allow yourself to have a couple of hours or an evening. We go through with each client what's appropriate for them on their own, and to use that time to see, for example, what it is in their mind that is causing them the discomfort that they want to get out and get away from it. So they might want to journal, they might want to, voice note, take some notes or whatever. But this is the key to this work. It's getting really comfortable with what's playing out in the mind. And then from there, we now start to get objective to it. So this is where we start to zoom out. This is where that balance place, this point of balance comes more in, because when we're fully in it, we can't see the wood from the trees and we want to get away from it to try and distract ourselves. The more we can kind of zoom out of ourselves and start to observe the thoughts and the self-talk, then we can get a bit of relief from it. Once we start, paying attention to stuff, writing it down, maybe bringing it to the next session, then we can start to unpick why we are talking to ourselves in the way that we do. And then we start to see those programs that are running. Yeah, a massive, one of the programs is the judgment program. At the other side of judgment is perceiving, which is watching. So what's happening when people are on their own? It's usually because there's some judgment voice running. We're saying some things that are not great in our mind. And what we want to do is we want to now start moving over to that perceiver. So starting to watch those judgments. So as the judgment arises, instead of it just running, we're now moving to the perceiver so we can start to watch the exact, narrative that we're saying to ourselves. And sometimes that question can be that we ask, we'll ask our clients, they can ask themselves, is whose voice of judgment actually is that? And that's quite a key one. And you can start to pick apart that, actually, that was something that I heard a lot growing up. That was my mum's voice or my dad's voice, or that was something that a school teacher said, or, one of my classmates said to me. And then from there, we can start to, separate ourselves from that younger version of us, because that voice is simply there on repeat because it's been there for so many years. It's been programmed into our system. Once we start to get some distance from it, so we start to see that it's not relevant here today, it's simply repetition and programming, we can start to, ask ourselves a question of, is it really relevant anymore? And if it's not, what do we now need to do to start practicing a different narrative, or, a stopping talking and maybe being more in that the perceiver mode rather than the judger?
Yeah, that's a big one. We see that so often, just to simply perceive. And, there's nothing wrong with evaluating a situation. That's pretty important for our survival too. But most people are fairly weak on the perceiving as a general rule. And if we link it back to, what we were talking about at the start of this session, we're meaning makers all the time. And there's a gap between reality and the meaning that we're making. And the more we can perceive, the more that gap starts to shrink. I find it fascinating. And when we're talking about the mind, there's a lot of different opinions on, how we should work on our mind. You got some people that are a fan of the law of attraction. You got some people that are a fan of thinking big. You got some people who are a fan of a growth mindset. You've got some people who are a fan of, let's say, positive psychology. There's so much out there on the mind. One of the things that, I'd like to put forward is that, the sign of a mature mind is we're just seeing reality as it is. It's not particularly positive or negative. But in the process of doing this work, we're seeing reality more and more as it is, so that we can make better decisions. I wondered, what your sort of thoughts are on these different ways of thinking about the mind and how we go about it.
I think that something very obvious, especially to me, and I hear this, a lot from the clients as well, is when you've stopped making as much meaning, when you're no longer caught up in conversations and you do become more of an observer of. So, I spend lots of time with people, with groups of people, and we hear this from clients as well, where people start to say, you have no opinion anymore. They'll start to question it, because it's simply watching people now, being really outraged by things, being really upset by things, being really excited about things. We spend hours in conversations, a lot of us, talking about other people and what's going on in their lives and having opinions on all the rest of it. Once you have done enough of this work, you start to see that what's coming out of our mouths, a lot of it is our programs running. And so you no longer will get us caught up in conversations and have these strong, and this can be quite scary for some people to hear this, but it's a lot more freeing, because you're now just perceiving people and you're just watching them in, the patterns that you are no longer caught up in. And this is so much healthier for us. You know, we think of all that excitement, all that adrenaline, all that anger, all of that stuff that runs through our bodies. And it's not to say we don't go through the process of allowing that stuff to come out. But once you get to the other side of that, the system can become a lot more calm, and you know, you're just less caught up with things than you may have been before. Things that you really thought that you needed to believe in and you know, fight for, which are actually maybe having a negative impact on your system and causing you sickness, and you know, to go away and you know, be distressed and anxious and stressed about things that we can just actually watch and perceive.
Totally. You know, I want to just take that thread and run with it for a little minute, because I think it's so relevant to a business owner. You know, most business owners, you know, want to be able to step out of their business so as they can work on it rather than in it and being subject to it, you know, subject to being buffeted around by the waves of the day-to-day. And, you know, for most people, it's an aspiration to step out and become objective and look back in. And that's what you're talking about there, essentially. You know, it's being able to take that perceiving role, almost be like the board member of your own business, somewhat neutral, but obviously invested, but just seeing things more objectively and neutrally, and, you know, having the ability to have a little bit of space so that you have clarity and calm. And, you know, most business owners that I speak to these days really long for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that really...
Yeah, that's the thing. When we're not caught up in all of that detail of all of that stuff that we're bothering ourselves with, that's where we can work on, you know, the creative part of us exists in the space, not in the noise. So that the less you're caught up in all of the day-to-day stuff and getting yourself bothered about stuff, the more that you can see it as simply programs that have been running for us for, you know, a long time. And we can see that in other people. The more space, the more capacity we have for the creativity to come through. We don't need to think our way into being creative. Creativity arises from the silence, from the space. So the more, you know, we can be like that, the more our, you know, potentially our staff, you know, the people that we work with, they'll feed off that as well. And that's how to be the best influence, because people will often go, well, if you don't have opinions, how are you going to, how's the world going to become better? And well, that's exactly it. The quieter we become, the better the world is going to be, in a sense. We don't need to fight
probably,
our way. Yeah.
Yeah, probably just add a little bit of a colour. It's okay to have an opinion, but often, you know, what you'll do is you'll hold it back to create space for others to come forward. And so if I think about it in the context of the business, a lot of people are a little bit scared to perhaps delegate. You know, they want to do it all. They want to do it their way. They want to do it to their level of quality. And so they get stuck, and they're working 12, 14-hour days. And, you know, I made this mistake for the best part of my career. And it was partly from a lack of basic trust in both myself and others. You know, but I think what we should point out is it's okay to have an opinion, but what we want to do is we want to empower and bring our staff up, you know, because most people, they really just want the autonomy and the growth and the feeling like they're contributing to something meaningful. And so if you can give that to your team, it's wonderfully powerful. And sometimes you just need to step out of the way. And that's the way that I like to think about what you just shared.
I think for some leaders as well, it's to know you're still worthy, you'll still be heard, and you'll still be seen if you allow others to step up as well, because there's a big part of identity, obviously, when we're in those roles and we kind of want to be a bit less busy, but we don't want to give it away for maybe not trusting that it's all going to be as perfect as we'd like it to be, but also in our, you know, we don't want to lose our own worthiness as well. So that's something that we definitely hear a lot from leaders.
100%. So I think we said we do half an hour in this session. We're going to do half an hour every week. And so we're just about at time. So, you know, first of all, I just want to thank you for jumping on again. It's been a cool conversation. Now, before I give our audience a gift as a takeaway at the end, you know, I'd just like to open it to you. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience today?
Yeah, not at this moment. You go.
Okay, cool. So you're probably wondering, how do we do this work on the mind? We talk a lot about programs, and there's a lot of conceptions about what this kind of work can look like. Maybe you've worked with a business coach before, maybe you've seen a therapist before. This work is very different to business coaching and therapy, and they all serve a purpose too, but this is very different. And so, if you're interested in understanding a little bit more about yourself and learning how your mind operates, then, for anyone that's watching today, I'll pop a link in the comments below. And there's a little quiz that you can take. It's 10 questions. I run this in the groups that I do throughout the year. It's 10 questions. It'll take you about 5 minutes. And you'll get some feedback on some developmental areas for yourself, free of charge. So the link will be below in the comments. Just hit the link, take the quiz, and we'll share with you some gold to get you started on the journey to know yourself and know your mind a little better, and start putting some of that into action. All right. So thank you so much again for today, Anita.
Thank you.
And
thanks everyone for watching.
next week.